Thank you.
Why don't we start with you, Evan, since it seems like the most logical place to start. I remember reading through the police account of what you endured for years at the hands of your abuser. And I'm wondering, what caused you to finally come forward and put an end to this?
Well, I just knew, he told me he was doing it to more kids. And, that's something that they have to come forward, on their own time. And I just felt, I was getting to a point where I was really depressed and I didn't know how to really function. I never fell into drugs or alcohol, but it kind of took over me and, I wasn't focusing. I was getting bad grades in school and I just, not the worst grades, but I was getting pretty bad grades. And, and it was really hard, and I applied to 11 colleges, and I got into 7 of them, but they were all out of state. And I realized, I just had to come forward about this, so I stayed in LA. I went to community college, and I needed to get it off of my head before I started my life. And it was, it wasn't until I was like 18 until I really did the research and was old enough to really kind of find out what sexual abuse is. And so once I did the research, I started realizing, oh my God, this did happen to me. And I did hear about it in health class in school in 9th grade. And I just didn't associate that with me and what happened to me. But, it just came to a point where I just knew, I'm here to tell the truth on this planet, and I'm not going to continue.
I remember this revelation came out shortly, within months of the Penn State allegations surfacing and really shining kind of a national spotlight on this crime and just how pervasive it is. Did that help sort of embolden you or to help you believe that people would take you seriously when you brought these charges because this man was in your house, he was like another family member? Did that play a role as you were assessing the situation?
Well, I did see Corey Feldman speak up about it, but it wasn't until a year after I came forward that I realized, I spoke to Corey myself on the phone, and he told me that Corey Haim Marty did the same thing to Corey Haim.
Right.
And at that point, it just freaked me out. But going a year back, I did see Corey Feldman talk about this, and I did some research, and I saw that this was something going on in the business, and hopefully, if I speak up, other people will as well, and it won't just be me by myself.
Right. Thank you. Well, let's talk about some of the obstacles to getting this film made. I've seen even in the weeks since its release, there's been a lot of controversy even surrounding the film and some of the people who were interviewed on screen. So can you talk to me about some of the challenges and how you're tackling the obstacles of having this film seen?
Well, I think the biggest challenge has been getting support. I have many friends in the industry, good friends who I went to college with, went to film school with, who aren't here tonight. They'll privately tell me they want to support the film, but publicly they won't. And that's been the most disappointing thing about this whole experience. And it's disappointing because we're doing everything we can to support people like Evan, the families in this film. And, our obligation is to them. This isn't about a film or...
You're trying to be sound off the stage now. Okay, continue.
Yeah, so really, a lot of people...
Go on, be serious, folks.
It's just the obligation we have to follow through with this film, to support people like Evan. Evan's, when we first saw the raw footage of Evan talking, that was a moving experience for us. When Joey C. finally came forward and started talking, that was those were the things that kept us through the months of hard times in this film.
And Dawn, if I might add, this film geographically takes place in Hollywood. It's an example. It's a metaphor. Hollywood is certainly very interesting to the American public, and that's what we want to do, is raise interest. These sorts of things have gone on in a lot of other places that you've never heard about, like U.S. junior swimming, which clearly would not have generated this sort of public interest. Hollywood is metaphorically one of the nicest, wealthiest, most exclusive, socially progressive neighborhoods in the entire world. It's a town where everyone prides themselves on knowing everything about everybody. Yet, it can still happen here. That means it happens everywhere.
I want to talk to two women who have been combating this issue and advocating for young actors for years, and who have been the focus of lawsuit threats and screaming sessions and annoying reporters. It's been a year or so since this film was shot. What have you seen in a year since legislation was put in place here in California to require that those who work with children undergo background checks? So what's happened?
Well, I'll speak to that. Your parting gift tonight is we did put up some postcards to talk about our law, because we love the law. We had awesome support to get the law. It was fascinating to do the legislative process. The problem is people don't know about the law. So, and we're so happy there's so many parents here tonight, because this one's for you. This law is for you. And you should not be working with anyone who meets the criteria who did not comply with the law. And when you stop working with them, they'll go get it, if they can. If they can't, they'll leave, and we've already seen people leave town. So it's doesn't mean that everything is perfect, but it's absolutely a tool for you to start to say, wait a minute, we care who our kids are working with, we care who we're giving money to, and so we hope that these will be available as you leave, and hope that you'll follow up with the law. We started working on this film 3 years ago. We were first contacted by the production company, so it's been a labor of love. And really quickly, Dawn, I have to we definitely want to thank Gabe Hoffman and Valentinas, because they're the money guys. They're the as much the heart and soul, and they've given us this absolutely wonderful product and this wonderful example and learning tool that we could not do alone.
If I could just speak to that quickly. Matt came up with the idea right after Corey Haim's death, and he'd lived in Hollywood for 10 years, and my day job as a hedge fund manager, very skeptical. I said, you can't make a movie around those two guys. Matt said, look, just do a research budget with Disarming. Don't shoot a single roll of film, but do a full serious research budget. Trust me, there'll be enough you'll want to make a movie. And sure enough, about 4 or 5 months later, after private investigator work and all those other things, Michael Hara and many other names with credible information and multiple accusers, Evan's situation and the total miscarriage of justice, and many other things. I mean, how could you sit at my desk and not write the check to get that exposed? I couldn't believe somebody hadn't done that before. There's literally 5 to 10 times the amount of credible research which Disarming uncovered. Unfortunately, being in this film is not exactly a wonderful role. Try to imagine if you were a victim of child sex abuse. I certainly can't if you were a survivor. And somebody comes to you and says, we'd like to make a documentary film. It's never been done before. We're not going to black out your face. We're going to give your name and last initial, but everybody's really going to find out who you are. We're not going to hide your voice. You're going to need to name your accuser, and you need to going to be very specific and have documentation and all that sort of thing. And by the way, you're not going to get paid a dime. Does that sound like a very appealing role? So we were very fortunate to have several survivors, such as Evan, who did have that strength and courage to come forward and make this happen.
I want you guys to address one of the criticisms of the film. There have been, I've noticed in preparation for tonight, several published reports that attack the credibility of one of the key figures in the Den story, Michael Egan. He, of course, leveled accusations about a very prominent director, Bryan Singer. He's since withdrawn his lawsuit. Does that undermine the credibility of this film, in your mind?
Well, you have two things. You have the film itself. You have but only one of the subjects in the film. And then you have that subject where he's in the film and the rest of his life. Where he is in the film, he is talking about Den. That's a court case that he won with two other individuals. I don't think any reasonable person could question that. What he did in his life outside afterwards is not in the film. So I don't reasonably see how someone could attract the credibility of the entire film based on Mike Egan's 2014 issues. But frankly, I think we got incredibly lucky at An Open Secret. When you consider the ravages, the child sex abuse, one of the worst scourges of humanity, could have an effect on someone, and that we had several participants, but one of those participants, that's the worst thing that you could say about one of them, I think we got an amazingly recovered group and got very lucky. Most victims are nowhere near along the lines of recovery as An Open Secret victims are.
Just to add on to that, and to tie back to how many victims there were, I know we've sort of mentioned it, but our organization gave Disarming drawers and drawers. I lost track of how many drawers of information they had that we had gathered over 10 years prior to filming. We absolutely believe every word that is in this film, based on 10 years of research. This is just a little picture of a few victims. There was so much more. And Mike Egan is, every word he says in the film is true. As Gabe just mentioned, we have to look at all the child actors we've ever seen. And when you hear about them on TV and say, child actor gone bad, their evil stage parents must have done something horrible, maybe now everyone in this room will go, maybe something else was going on for that kid. Maybe it isn't just that they're, drug addict, crazy person. Maybe something happened to them. Because I think that's the reality of most of the cases you hear about in the news.
That's a great point. Did anyone have any questions of their own before I continue? Why don't you come up?
Come up.
Or shout. Just shout. It's a small one.
Evan,
Yeah.
how do you feel about your cousin still being managed by Marty Weiss? Yeah.
Well, that's frustrating. And I don't know. I mean, he could have been a victim himself, or he was not, and I don't know.
Did you ever talk about it?
Yeah, we have, but he
doesn't want to come forward.
Right. So
But Marty, is Marty managing kids now?
I don't know. I think he is, but I know that my cousin and him had an organization, or a film company called Two Wise Guys Productions, because it was a coincidence that they had the same last name, and they called it Two Wise Guys, and there were videos on YouTube until about 2 weeks ago with them, and I took pictures of it, so.
Dawn, you bring up a very important point about Marty Weiss, and that is, let's not forget not only about Brian Peck, but about the value that you all contribute by coming to the theater and keeping this in theaters. 3 weeks after Cannes, the Daily Mail, large United Kingdom paper, published a story about Brian Peck in depth on June 8th, and took the photographs and showed where he worked and explained exactly what the loopholes are, the regulations. That essentially the state of California does not put a bubble wrap around children's workplaces like they do schools. Very simply, he can work in the same building, he can be surrounded by children, as long as he's not working with them one-on-one. Clearly, we don't feel that's acceptable as a society. But by you all supporting the film, asking friends to support the film, keeping this topic discussed, there's something very important called the Savile effect, and that's why the UK papers were so onto this. Jimmy Savile, for those of you who don't know, was about a top 50 A-lister in the United Kingdom, literally for decades. And just after he died, a couple of years ago, it came out that he did dozens, if not hundreds, of horrific things, which I won't even get into. Point being, a lawyer has made this study that the percentage increase in reports of child sex abuse to Scotland Yard in a country of over 60 million people has increased over 30% in just 2 years. So you all can be a part of the Savile effect in the United States. Discussion leads to results.
One moment.
Hi, thank you guys for making this. I'm curious, in the process of making the documentary, I've worked on documentaries where there are some controversial issues. Did you have challenges of people trying to stop you, start undermine you, start rumors? How challenging was it in the production process to get completed and get the support you needed to finish? Or was it at all?
When you stick to the truth, it's not as hard as you would think.
We have a couple more questions if you can.
We got time for 2.
All right, one, and start moving across the room now.
I have to commend you guys. I mean, it seems like there's such a dark cloud that you stepped into and that you put yourself out there. So I'm going to say a prayer in the name of Jesus that God will just protect you in what you're doing, because I find it phenomenal. As a mom, I was just devastated in my heart. I was sitting there trying to cry. My name is Shirley Hussar. I am with Lifetime Television. I'm going to be on a show called Living with the Enemy, which will air next Thursday on the 23rd. I would ask you all to watch. I want to say this too.
Okay, no more commercials.
So my question is this. How did you get the parents not to say, I want to kill these men? I mean, it was so, as a parent, they're just infuriated, and they seemed so calm, like I was upset. I'd be beyond upset. Because I didn't see that in the parent. That's my question.
I think when we started production, at least from our situation with BizParentz, because we were a foundation, we were dealing with parents all the time.
Sorry.
For us, we went to production and requested that they be very sensitive to parents. We're stage parents ourselves, so we knew that this isn't as easy as evil stage parent or not. There's a much more complicated thing going on about parents who love their children. And as Gabe said, that goes with lots of other things. It goes with lots of other elite level endeavors. You know, it's kids that are in heavy duty private schools academically. It's kids who are in swimming. It's kids who are in gymnastics. The places where those dreams are strongest and the parents believe in them the most is where these things happen. So for us, it was really important that parents were respected and that they were not portrayed to be, you know, villains at all. I mean, the bad guys are the bad guys, and we hope that the film, you know, put that out there in that way, that we aren't trying to blame everyone else. It's not the organization's fault, it's not SAG-AFTRA's fault, it's not, you know, the other organizations you saw going through, it's not their fault. It's not the parents' fault, it's the bad guy's fault. And I think the film did a really good job of doing that, and that's what made those parents feel safe enough to talk. Unfortunately, we've got one last question.
First of all, I'd like to say hats off and congratulations to that entire crew up there. You did a fabulous job on this picture. The next thing I want to say is that Hollywood has been in decay for a long time. This goes back to the 60s. A friend of mine that I went to high school with, who starred in The Sound of Music with Sherman Carr, the two of them found out just how bad Hollywood was when they went and made The Sound of Music. Because afterwards, to stay in the business, they were invited to the same kind of parties these gentlemen were invited to. There was The Valley of the Dolls, which also was released and put out and talked about Hollywood and what they did and all the drugs. And it's really a sad epitaph for Hollywood to have this kind of activity going on and not be exposed. You have a question? If we may, maybe one more.
All right, there's one down here. We got these guys.
You go first.
Okay. All right, I'll come over. Go ahead, please.
Yep. I'm just curious about the MPAA rating. I know, Gabe, you've been talking about that in the press a little bit. Seems ridiculous that this film would have an R rating, so I just wanted to hear a little bit more about it.
I was so glad that you asked that question. If I might ask you all by a show of hands, please raise your hands if you believe that An Open Secret should have an R rating. Please raise your hands if you think An Open Secret should not have an R rating. I think you have your answer.
Right. You know that's not how the rating system works out. But just that's my heart. Did anyone get a picture of that?
But specifically based on the facts, we did write a very respectful letter to the MPAA. Let me just say that they understood that An Open Secret was a unique film. They reached out at the most senior levels proactively to our team, and we had time constraints. It was something that was going to take a little longer, and eventually we had deadlines and we had to take the easier choice. The letter that we wrote was after we had some time to have further conversations, to see what reviewers had to say, and that's in the letter. And we wish to restart the conversation with them in a respectable fashion, and at the same time put our views and our facts out there so that anyone who is thinking about seeing the film can read that letter and decide for themselves whether the language used is appropriate for an R rating. I would guess that most of us heard much more explicit things in our sex ed classes in 7th and 8th grade.
One last question, then we'll wrap it up. I know there's so much to ask. Do you want me to? Here.
Yeah.
I'd love for you guys to address the news that's been out recently about a lot of the on-set educators that have been discovered to not be having their permits. I think a lot of people here are probably guild members. I'm a member of SAG-AFTRA. I had no clue that you needed these green permits. So what are the guilds doing to get the word out? DGA, WGA, SAG-AFTRA, all of that.
Well, if we could start with something very simple, is that there are many things which our government, state or federal, asks us to do, which are much more arduous than, let's say you have 50, 1,000, or even 100,000 members, to simply place each member's name into a website that the state provides and get an answer, just like you would check a social security number or anything else. So what we want to draw is the distinction and say, it's not simply, I'm not law enforcement, therefore I have to do nothing if I'm a big organization. It's not the other extreme. But there are ways in which we can be vigilant through using our own resources in a very reasonable fashion, which could make a big difference, such as that.
I think adding on to that, Gabe is exactly right. The studio teachers, for those of you who don't know, because not everyone is in the industry I know here, children go to set with a set teacher. In California, that person is there 24/7 and they're the welfare worker. They are fingerprinted, so they don't fall under our new law because they already had that fingerprinting thing. What's been going on lately is people are showing up to set and saying that they're a studio teacher when they are not. So think about who would go to that length. You just saw a movie, put 2 and 2 together. That's who's going to show up on set and say, hey, baby, I'm a studio teacher. So we have, and I was in the same spot. Honestly, my kids have been in the industry for 20 years. I didn't know there was a green card. They are little cards that the teachers have that say that they have that license. They also have a database for studio teachers, though, and who of us has ever logged on to that studio teacher website and figured out that they have it? So even when it existed, we didn't do it. So I think that's a big lesson for all of us, is to not just believe what everybody on set tells you, but to use those databases. Get the license, make sure that everyone you have that's around you, the managers, the publicists, the photographers, the studio teachers, that they have whatever licenses they're supposed to have, and that you check it.
And additionally, there's already discussion that there's going to be photographs added to the green cards that don't exist so far. So there will be, I'm sure, I don't even think it will take legislation. I think the DLSE will just change that so that their credentials will have their photo on them, because that'd be nice.
There's one thing, if I might add, Dawn. Some issue has been made of SAG. The Screen Actors Guild for decades, whether it goes back to communist blacklists or child sex abuse, the record shows that they've been one of the strongest advocates. They help fund BizParentz and the California Child Protection Act. So what this shows is that even in one of the largest, most caring organizations out there, that sure, you might actually find a pedophile at the heart of that organization whom nobody knows is a pedophile because they're that good, and that might make the occasional small PR mistake. And when you weigh those things on the scale of justice, I think you come to an obvious conclusion that even the best and most intentioned and largest organizations, there's still lessons we all have to learn where we could all do a little better.
Thank you very much for speaking with us.